Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader here, Damien. Lately, I've been just thinking about how I'm addicted to comic books, and wondering why I'm so addicted to comic books more over the long view of my life, more than anything else. Although I've had plenty of other interests, but I'm still interested in the very first comic book I read. I have a reprint of that, and I still find it really cool and see a lot of great things in it. In a way that I connect to my childhood feelings more through comic books than other things. I am going through a huge period of reading huge amounts of comic books, and all through my life, in greater or lesser amounts, have read a lot of comic books, and only recently thought about the fact that comic books are a permanent part of my life, maybe, and kind of thinking it in terms of an addiction or just something that I'm really stuck on. And a huge variety. I can read any kind of comic book, I'll get some kind of pleasure out of it. Certainly wouldn't get the same kind of pleasure out of any book or any TV show. So it seems to me like some of the top reasons comic books are so addictive would be nostalgia, connecting to your childhood, um, and that certainly can explain some of it. Another kind of part of it is maybe certain people's brains, and I would certainly be one of them, are wired to love to really click with the combination of words and pictures. I think the very first time I got to read a comic book when I was a kid, and it was a copy of the Avengers. It just lit my brain on fire. And then my parents told me, you can't have any more. They were raised in the 50s and believed comics would rot your brain and turn you into a horrible person. So that may have added to my addiction. I was desperate to get a hold of more comics, and it was hard to find any, hard to get a hold of any. But it just somehow comic books spoke to me more than anything else. Um, and then I guess another aspect to it is collecting. But I'm not a great. I like hunting down comics that I don't have and searching for them. And certainly now it's much more possible to find them than it was 20, 30 years ago. Uh, but I'm not that good of a collector. I'm certainly not good at organizing things and taking good care of them. And over time, I've been in denial over how much I love comic books anyway, and I would give huge amounts away or let others slip through my fingers in ways that I feel really terrible about now. Um, be very careful about getting rid of your comic book collection. Think long and hard about that. Uh, so and I guess maybe connected to the collecting thing is the serial nature of most comic books and how they go on and on. They have this deep history. They have an ongoing future. So there's always more, and there's always connections you can make between them. There's kind of the fascinating history of comics and the evolution and development of them, or occasionally de-evolution. Um, so and that variety, perhaps you get tired of one kind of comic book, and then you have another kind you can move to for a while and move back. And the whole idea of superheroes, even though it seems silly and immature to like superheroes, and maybe we're just men child and women children clinging to this idea of superheroes, I think that there's something not only wonderfully colorful and imaginative about them, but very flexible, and they allow for so many different kinds of stories and so many evolutions. And at the same time, there's kind of a comforting pattern and similarity that you can follow, and it just turns out to be a really good storytelling vehicle. Um, Early on, because my parents wouldn't let me read comic books or buy them very often, I might have gotten two the first year I discovered I like comic books. But very soon I was looking in the ads in there, and I ended up subscribing to a newspaper, so that was okay with my parents. That was called the Comic Book Buyer's Guide. So as a kid, I would just pour over that. It was like a penny saver for comic books. It was just endless ads for comic books, the occasional column, and a few other things. So as a very little kid, I was looking at all this. It was all for, you know, comic book collectors with some money, and I had no money, and also was not allowed to get comic books anyway. And then, you know, just looking back on it, I've always, when I haven't been stupidly giving them away or selling them or just losing them, I've been amassing comic books. Even when I don't have time to read them, I would grab a whole series from the comic book store and think, well, I'll read them later, and I would feel better knowing I would have lots of comic books to read someday. Most recently, I've had a huge, long, busy period that's slowing down a bit in the last year or two. But I would still always get graphic novels and collections out of the library, and I would just pile them up beside my bed and usually have to return them to the library unread. But it would always go on and on. There was never a stop to it. But, you know, I would often just be telling myself, oh, yeah, I used to like comic books a lot, and now I just like to see what's going on with them, or, you know, or have a little brief nostalgia trip. But most recently, as my time has freed up, I had an iPad at the same time. In the last year and a half, it was very easy for me to read comic books on my iPad. I could easily pick it up before I went to bed, or at my lunch breaks at work, or, you know, even in my car for a few minutes before I went into work. And so I started ordering more and more comic books on my iPad. And I just looked recently. So it's been about a year and a half. I just looked recently, and I have a whole bunch of comic books on my Dark Horse app. I have 250 comic books on my Dark Horse app. And on my regular Comixology app, it's hard to count exactly how many there are there. But if I go to my account, I think I must have 300 or 400 comics there too. So in a year and a half, thinking I'm not even that into comic books, I've amassed 600 digital comics. So why am I so addicted? Why is it so powerful to me and connects me through time and everything? Nothing no explanation fully satisfies me. But I think that a lot of it has to do with the medium itself in some way. As a kid, I drew my own little comic books, especially mostly just because I couldn't get any of my own. And that led me to a lifelong enjoyment of drawing. I'm certainly never been anywhere close to the amount of skill that a real comic book artist needs. But maybe the fact that you can draw and you can tell stories a little bit and you have your own imagination makes you click and relate to comic books themselves a little more. There's a little more accessible than other, movies or TV or if I could play some music, if I could play a musical instrument, I'd probably be, I'm really into music, but I'd probably be that much more into music. But I can't, nothing fully explains it to me why I can remember more comic book trivia than anything else. I think our brains in particular are wired towards trivia, but my brain's not full of sports trivia or car trivia. It's mostly full of comic book trivia. I'll discover that when I talk about comic books with someone who just casually knows something about comic books, and I can reel off all the artists and the inkers and the writers and the different eras of characters and all of that. I have friends who know huge amounts of Star Trek trivia and that sort of thing, but comic books have always been more my speed. So I'd love to hear what other people think. If anyone, probably everyone's addiction is a slightly different story, and everyone's feeling of why they're addicted or if they're addicted will be different. I'd love to hear what other people have to say on the subject. Part of this is having reached a certain age. I can see that comic books are never going to go away for me, and I'm embracing it. And also, I'm kind of an old father. Just had a baby 4 years ago, and perhaps that's helping me get in touch with things and be less pretentious and just see what you really love and what you really enjoy, because kids are so pure in their enjoyment of things. So why is comic books one of my purest enjoyments? I think if I had to give anything up, if I had to give up everything but one form of entertainment, right now anyway, I'm thinking comic books would be the thing that I would keep. I'd love to have both music and comic books. I'd be happy if I just had those two things. Oops, microphone. And it's so much fun to read about comic books. I think it's been doing these videos and watching other people's videos has been a huge relief of the tension of you suddenly discover you have all these thoughts about what you're reading and who can you share it with. My wife will put up with a little. I've ranted to her on and on about Jack Kirby over the years, and she gets a little chuckle over it. But she really isn't going to be interested in every little detail. And some of my other friends read a little bit of comic books, but so thanks for putting up with this little rant. And if anyone does have ideas, leave some comments or make your own video. I'd be very interested in what people's thoughts are on this subject. I did a few nights ago make an even longer video on this, and I thought I just sounded too sleepy and drony, so I took it down. I made it into a private video, but I'll put the link. If you're really interested in hearing me talk about this again in just a more sleepy fashion, I'll put the link down below, and if you want to, you can click on it and see. It's pretty much the same as what I've said here, maybe a few different details and some different comic book covers that I was flashing at the screen. So talk to you all later. Don't be too sleepy and keep reading.